Hello, I'm Mandi McLeod. Welcome to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. Coming up in the show, pick me. 10 candidates contest 3 seats. The battle for Fonterra board begins. Why have equity partnerships not been adopted by the sheep and cattle industry? Is there another strategy for the continuation of this ageing industry? And what should the marketing image for agriculture be if we hope to attract new talent? Sexy and cool, or hardworking and honest? How do we get it right? Joining me today is Susan Huria of the Huria Anders Consultants and Neil Bateup, Chairman of the Waikato Hauraki Rural Support Trust. Welcome.
Kia ora.
Now, Fonterra's just announced its 10 candidates for 3 positions on its board, against 8 potentials and 2 incumbents who are up for re-election. Susan, can you tell me a little bit about what your role in this process has been and a little bit about what you do?
Well, just to put it in context, Mandy, I worked for, I was the independent member on the Fonterra Governance Development Program. I finished in August last year, and we were involved, 2 shareholders council, 2 board members, and I was the independent member, and we were working through a program of developing rural leaders. The dairy industry is very good at doing that, and they've ploughed millions of dollars into developing these rural leaders. Some of them will end up perhaps as Fonterra directors, otherwise the investment will go into the wider dairy industry.
Neil, what are the dangers of having 3 new directors, which is an effective 30% turnover rate, and putting that alongside a new CEO? Is that a cause for concern?
Yeah, it would be a cause of concern if all 3 were new. Yeah, that shouldn't happen. Hopefully it won't happen, but it is good to get new blood in there, and it's one new director every 3 years would I think actually enhance the board. I think that's probably the way it should go, and hopefully there's some continuity there, and that the existing directors do get re-elected. But maybe we could go to 2 new ones, but yeah, we do need continuity in there. If we had 3 new ones plus a new CEO, I'd be a bit concerned about that.
But Neil, the 9 shareholder directors are backed up by 5 of the best commercial directors in the country. So it's a team effort, and I think they could stand probably some refreshment on the board. Yep. I've been a professional director for 15 years, and every time new directors come on board on the different boards I've been involved in, they always add value to the organisation. So not too many, but a slow rotation.
Absolutely a slow rotation. But yeah.
Susan, because that brings to the question: is there ever a good time to reconstruct the board, and how should it happen? Is Fonterra getting it right with the way it actually is at the moment, where we've got 10 for 3?
Well, just to step back a minute, they in the early days, in the early 2000s, they used to send out a video of like a vox pop of the prospective directors. And that wasn't really a very good process. They've had a new one for a while called the candidate assessment process, which is chaired by the chairman of Zespri and a number of other luminaries. So they're independent, and they assess the talent that puts their name forward for the board on 5 criteria: governance, industry knowledge, communication, finance, and international marketing, I think. So if you get ticks on all those boxes at being proficient, then that information goes through to the shareholders. So they now can vote from a position of having full information on the candidates, not just voting for Susan, mother of 2 from Silverdale, which is, perhaps how it was in the past. Now, this is pretty much a process that other companies, closely held or wider public companies, go through the same process. So it's quite rigorous, and it gives the voters a good foundation to make their decision.
Do you think there's in those 5 categories that you've put up, are there some that, if you were a voter, a shareholder, what areas would you be looking for the most proficiency in for a director of Fonterra?
Well, I'd be looking at track record, because you don't know what you don't know, and I know that Fonterra directorship at Fonterra, not the commercial directors, but the shareholders directors. It's not a directorship in the common sense. It's actually a marriage to the company, because one of the directors told me he spent 200 days away from home in his first year as a director. Now, you have to be in a certain place in your life to be able to, you know, to commit that sort of energy to the company.
No, that's a good point. Neil, attracting new farmers has always been a challenge, irrespective of what the industry is. And I guess the dairy industry has done a really good job by having the share milking industry, the contract milking industry, and latterly the equity partnerships to allow growth and ownership and inequity. Why do you think the sheep and cattle industry have not adopted these strategies to the same extent?
Yeah, there's probably two reasons in there that I can see. First of all has been the profitability in that area for many, many years. It's good to see wool prices, meat prices up now, lamb prices, and finally those people can start to make some money again. But profitability's been a real problem. So bringing another person in to share there hasn't been enough wealth there to share. So I think that's been one of the issues. Probably one of the other issues is that the dairy industry's always been a cooperative industry where people share and help others, whereas in the meat and wool sector it's probably been a little different in that people actually compete. So if they go to the sale yards to sell or buy animals, they're competing with their neighbour, so there hasn't been perhaps that cooperative feeling amongst them. Yeah.
That's a really good point, Neil, because I would also add that the leadership in the dairy industry has been better than sheep and beef, who are you know, just not on the same page. And so, you know, while the red meat strategy's been introduced, I note it was written by Deloitte, and that is, you know, pretty fundamental that you don't get a consultant to write your strategy. I'm sorry to, but you know, and that's only part of it. You know, so they really do need to get a cross-sector strategy.
Yeah.
One of the things that came up for me was that earlier this year, Beef and Lamb New Zealand brought across an Australian father and daughter. He was an unapologetic misogynist when it comes to women and farm ownership. It was very clear from him that his daughter would never own any of his land. What sort of message do you think that this gives to sheep and beef farmers in New Zealand?
Do you want to go for that one?
No,
look,
yeah, look, that's coming from the dark ages. Yeah, the
70s.
There's real talented people in both genders, and there's some women in the dairy industry doing a tremendous job, and they can do that in the meat and wool industry as well. And in fact, on Country Calendar, I've seen some women who are making a real good fist of running some sheep farms. And
maybe it goes back to the leadership question again.
Yeah,
just quickly
does.
Before we throw a break, I just want your opinions or your views on our marketing image for agriculture. You know, we've seen the glossy Dairy NZ ads and it makes it look like a pretty great job. Is that the right job, or are we having younger people hitting the farms with not enough practical skills and knowledge and fundamental, I guess, perception of what it's like to be a farmer?
If they've got an attitude that they want to achieve and they get on the right farm, there's certainly they can learn an awful lot. I employed a girl a few years ago who was a primary school teacher who had been in a cowshed once in her life, a very intelligent person who asked lots of good questions, and she was a fantastic employee. If people come with the right attitude, they're wanting to learn, it can actually happen.
But is it more of a lottery then, Neil? You kind of like getting the the slots to work at the same time. You're getting in a good employee with a good owner. I mean, is that?
Yeah, there is some of that. There is a lottery. There's a lot of good farmers out there who do help people work through the system. There's opportunities there for people who want to learn to actually work through the system and get some very, very good jobs within it.
And topped up by immigrants.
Yeah, topped up by immigrants.
Absolutely. Thanks, team. Coming up after the break, the New Zealand Institute of Economic Research explains the productivity gap between New Zealand and Australia. As the things we do, Australia does better. What do we need to do to catch up to our colleagues across the ditch? A South Waikato processing facility resource consent gets the official go-ahead. The question is, do we really need another milk processing plant in the Waikato? And as we head into the semi-finals of the Rugby World Cup, who will win and why? We put our loyalties up for debate. All of this when we return. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. According to an article in Straight Furrow, only 30% of Australia's productivity gain over New Zealand can be attributed to mining. The rest is described as differences in the quality of management, the quality of process innovation and the quality of labour and capital. Essentially that what New Zealand does, Australia does better, except hopefully in the Rugby World Cup. So while New Zealand is ahead in agriculture, water and energy, we are far behind in the service sector productivity. So here's the question. With 1 million people employed in New Zealand, with low levels of qualifications, are we dumbing down our ability to progress, Susan?
Well, I'd debate whether we should be comparing ourselves with Australia. And NZTE have recently put out some figures which show agriculture, so far ahead of productivity when compared with manufacturing or food and beverage. So I think we're doing all right. I think some of the structural change needs to take place in the agricultural and pastoral sector, and I think that will happen over time.
Well, I guess the question is, are we guilty of employing unskilled people just to have a warm bod in the job?
Yeah, we probably are. There's a lot of jobs in agriculture that need to be done. We need somebody to do it, and we often start with unskilled people. But hopefully, as I said before, we need to put the training in so that those people actually become skilled at the job, because a skilled person will actually produce a lot more productivity will be a lot higher using skilled people. So, but often it's hard to find the skilled people, and we need to do that training. We need to get people up to speed so that they can actually add to the businesses.
Because I guess when I looked at the stats, when I went back and had a look at the sector productivities, whilst Australia, agriculture in New Zealand is actually ahead of Australia, the gap of 60% is actually decreasing. And when I kind of looked at and thought about why that was, it really seemed to me, Neil, that whilst the ideal is to bring unskilled labour in and train them up, that didn't actually seem to be the case when I looked at some of the other interviews that I've done around training, that perhaps we're not doing that well enough. And it goes back to what we were saying in the earlier segment around our training. Are we actually training people appropriately, or are we bringing them into unskilled jobs and spitting them out broken at the end of it in some cases? Should we be demanding quality over quantity to improve our productivity sector, not just in agriculture?
Yeah, we probably should. One of the dangers actually is probably as farms get larger, there are jobs that are repetitive and need doing on a regular basis, like milking cows for long periods of time, and people don't get exposure to the other parts of managing a farm. So some of those people probably don't progress through the system, and that's sad. In the old days when I was young, a farmer maybe employed one person who worked with the farmer and learnt the whole job right through. There's probably less opportunity for that now. So there needs to be ways within the farms that people actually can learn and work through it. And hey, that's something that farmers probably need to look at, and managers of farms need to look at, is how can they add value to those people and encourage them to keep moving through the system.
Do you think the corporates would be better placed to do that rather than, single farmer? Single farmer.
Yeah, maybe, but there's a danger that the corporates are so big that they only want to fill those positions at the bottom end and not bring people through. Some of the corporate farms are quite large, whereas...
Certainly in my experience, the corporate farmers are better placed.
Yep.
But it's often the owner-operators with one employee that turn out the better product, simply because there's more that time.
Okay.
So, okay. The South Waikato processing facility that's just been granted a resource consent to discharge wastewater. This go-ahead's going to make Arapuni the third largest milk processor in the Waikato, drawing from a 70-kilometre radius from around Arapuni. It's only 25 kilometres away from Fonterra's Litchfield plant. Thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yeah, thumbs down. Depends a lot on ownership and that sort of thing. I'm concerned that we're actually breaking the industry up and creating, and I don't think we're actually adding value.
Well, it is only a powder plant.
It's only a powder plant, which will be the same as Fonterra powder plants and everything else. They'll be competing on the same market as what we are. There'll be tankers running in opposite directions down the road. Yeah, some of the reasons for putting Fonterra together were to get rid of a lot of the inefficiencies within the system, and we're almost bringing them back in again.
But competition is good.
Competition is good.
It'll only be localised competition.
It's localised competition, but that's okay. But what I'd like to see them is that they can actually compete on a standalone basis. Currently, with Dairy Milk, these companies are setting themselves up, many of them with overseas ownership, getting cheap Fonterra milk to compete with Fonterra for. If they can actually be competitive on a standalone basis, and maybe they should get Dairy Milk for 3 years or something until they get their own suppliers. But they need to be able to stand up in the marketplace. They need to be able to...
As a credible business unit.
As a credible business unit. And yeah, currently, yeah, if overseas owners can come in here, use cheap milk to make a profit for themselves and take out of the country, they're not actually adding anything to the...
So the perfect scenario is the Māori-owned milk powder plant at Mokai on the Central Plateau.
Except it's not totally Māori-owned. It's got a large backing from offshore, so it's actually a Māori front with offshore investment.
And they are taking Fonterra's Dairy Milk as well. Yeah,
it's majority owned by
currently.
Māoridom. The Vietnamese are where it ends up, and they've got one on the board. But you know, the board is chaired, and the majority are Māori.
Most of the independent companies have started up being New Zealand owned.
And I couldn't tell from my research into this processing facility where the ownership was. So
sounded Russian.
Could have been, but actually the Zoag or whatever their name was is actually it sounds like a New Zealand group of management consultants that are managing the process and getting investors in. Okay. But anyway,
but it's still good. You know, 10% is out of Fonterra hands of the market. It's decreasing, probably a percentage a year. I don't think they're terribly worried about it. No, as a company,
but I'd just like to see them stand on their own 2 feet and not.
That's right.
Not be backed up by having guaranteed milk from Fonterra. And often that milk taken at times of the year that disadvantages Fonterra's shareholders.
Subsidised by Fonterra
subsidised and used in off-peak times to support the efficiency of their factories versus Fonterra factories.
Okay, Susan, it's time now to discuss your favourite topic, the Rugby World Cup.
Well, I'm going to the final, and I've got tickets to the third and fourth, because when you bought a ticket to the final, you had to buy, third and fourth as well, which was probably good marketing on their part, because who else wants to know who comes third and fourth? But although my son plays rugby and touch, I couldn't be less interested.
Great.
It's a great event. It is an event. It's the third biggest sporting event in the world. And it's wonderful for New Zealand, and it is, the Cloud is a great place to meet friends, and, it's a good crack, as they say, but I'm not really interested in rugby.
Neil, who's going to make it to the finals? Who's it going to be?
Yeah, the All Blacks and Wales, I believe, are the two that are going to make it. The battle between Australia and the All Blacks is going to be a huge battle, and, the winning margin won't be huge. I'd still back the All Blacks to come through it. And I think Wales is very well coached. They've come through with no injuries, and Warren Gatland's a real good coach, and I believe
3 New Zealand coaches heading into the semis. That's incredible.
That's interesting, isn't it?
So why do people not like Quade Cooper? He's from Tokoroa.
He is a Kiwi.
Oh come on, we're not going to own him.
Yeah, he was a Kiwi,
and he goes out with Stephanie Rice.
Doesn't matter. We still don't want to own him. I don't think he actually should be. No, he's been a little bit too arrogant, I think. Maybe that's a persona
that's really what it's about. I think it's
maybe, but he doesn't. He's not playing up to his attitude. I don't think. And I have to say, Paddy Weepu.
Yeah.
What a legend.
He's done well, hasn't he?
He's done well.
I'd
like to see him make the first 5 for next week's game. I think he's not particularly used well enough where he is. I'd like to see him go into first 5.
It's a possibility, yeah.
It's amazing. I saw him on crutches at a do in Wellington maybe a year ago.
With a broken leg. Yeah.
And he could hardly walk. It was incredible.
And then when he came back, he was really out of condition, but... he's going really well.
He has. And Ma'anonu, I mean, for a guy that almost didn't make the team, Ma'anonu has to be, I think, one of the players of the Rugby World Cup. But I have to say the team that I reckon that has consistently performed is the Welsh.
Yep.
And they're good to look at too, let's not forget. Let's not to forget that. But having spent 2 years in Wales, I'm kind of like, you know, I'd be really happy for a Welsh All Blacks final. Susan, from a really practical point of view, we've seen New Zealand go into depression when we lost the Rugby World Cup. Given that we're kind of borderline a recession now, do you think there's going to be a financial impact to the country if A, God forbid, we don't make it through to the finals, or we lose the cup?
Well, I think, we've probably learnt from a few years ago when everyone, was very sad for a while, but I don't think it will be as bad. People have matured and moved on. I think the economic sort of lift we were hoping for from the World Cup probably hasn't eventuated. Certainly not in the places that, people thought they were, with restaurants complaining, etc. But I think, we're a different country than we were 4 or 5 years ago, and we'll just get on with the next. And we've got an election to look forward to, and more importantly, I think the Greens have just scored 5 more points, probably up to 15.
Well, that disastrous news, we're going to have to go to break. Because after the break, we're going to ask Susan and Neil what's caught their eye this week. Is it going to be a rant, or will it be a rave? You join us after the break. Welcome back to Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. It's time now for my favourite segment, the rant and rave. Neil, a rave, I believe.
Yeah, I have a rave, and my rave is going to be what we were talking about before, the Rugby World Cup. I believe it's actually been a really, really good event. It's New Zealanders have really got on board. It's been great to see the stadiums full all around the country. The good humour that all the crowds have been in, and around the waterfront and that sort of thing. It's just been really, really good to see that. The only thing, Susan mentioned before, the value of the Rugby World Cup to New Zealand. It's quite interesting. I read the other day that what the Rugby World Cup has brought to New Zealand financially is what Fonterra earns every 6 hours in a whole year for New Zealand. So putting it in perspective, it's good, it's great, it's been a great thing, but Fonterra actually does a hell of a lot for the country.
They're the biggest rig in town.
Biggest rig in town, and that perhaps puts it in perspective.
Wow, I did not know that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Susan?
I spend much of my day job working in Māori entities, and for the last decade I've been involved in governance. So your viewers might not know this, but there's about 2,000 Māori trusts and probably about 200 incorporations, plus the iwi-owned entities. And NZEIR recently valued that economy at 36 billion. How their methodology was who knows, but it's a stab in how they assess that. So it's an emerging part of our economy. I don't think there's enough body of knowledge around the sector. It's a natural grouping. There's it's the biggest natural grouping of shareholders in Fonterra. So if they ever got together, look out, the elections would look quite different. And my sort of, not really rave, but I think it's time for a generational change. A lot of those trusts and incorporations, it's a tag, you're the last in the room, so you get the job as the chair. The marae committees, evolved, and Kaumātua are running them, and I think perhaps now it's time to get the qualified and professionals from the different whānau and iwi back to help run those businesses. Many of them, the big stake of course is in farming, and probably they're overexposed in farming as an asset class, but it's time for generational change. So move over the old guys mostly, and let some of the young people, pay them properly, bring them home
and allow them to use their skills, because that's probably the biggest one, isn't it?
Yes, and many of the entities I've worked with are very, they work very hard, they're very well-meaning, but there's no financial or business skills, and so hard for them to read a balance sheet, and professional development is not you know, huge. So even if you can't read a balance sheet, you should go and learn. But so it's time for a generational shift. Get some of the young people home from the cities. They can fly to the meeting and pay them properly, so they can, you know, just add value that's needed to really lift the game for all of New Zealand.
That wraps up our latest edition of Straight Talk, brought to you by Straight Furrow. I'd really like to thank my guests Neil Bateup and Susan Huria. And thanks to you too for watching. Remember to check out my blog online at Country 99 TV. I love hearing from you. I'll catch you next week. And in the meantime, check out Pete Murray's new CD, because I've just heard him in the green room and he's awesome. Catch you next week.